Welcome to the Cloud Pod, where the forecast is always cloudy. We talk weekly about all things AWS, Google, and Azure. We are your hosts,
Justin,
Jonathan,
and Peter. Episode 53, recorded on January 2nd, 2020. 2019, we hardly knew you thee.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Woo!
Hey, Happy New Year.
It's been a lovely break here over the holiday season, and we've been blessed by all of our lovely cloud providers by not releasing a lot of stuff, so we can do a great 2019 recap show today. So that's a win that I did not expect to have happen.
Yep, excellent.
I suspected 500 announcements all between Christmas and New Year's that we would be buried. That's been kind of going the last couple months here, but luckily that is not the case. So let's jump into 2019. So if you guys remember way back in episode like 3 or 4, we predicted some stuff for 2019 that we sucked at. But we will touch base on those and see how we did for 2019, and then we'll talk about maybe what our hopes and dreams are for 2020. And then we will jump into a couple new news items, and then we will skip the lightning round this week for a fantastic round of Ask TCP, which is our new Ask the Cloud Pod listeners. Submitted questions to us on our Slack, and I have those ready for you guys to answer away in some level of due diligence. We'll see how it goes. But first of all, the 2019 recap. Drum roll, please. So I predicted that there'd be consolidation in the smaller cloud providers like DigitalOcean or Linode, allowing a solid number 4 or number 5 player to kind of come out of that. That did not happen. There was no acquisitions by DigitalOcean or Linode. We did see some interesting announcements for DigitalOcean, a managed Kubernetes service. Linode's done some things as well, but no consolidation in that space, which was a little bit surprising for me, especially since I predicted this would happen in 2019. It has not happened. What do you guys think? Was I just completely on the wrong path?
No, I think we're just way ahead of our time. I think it's destined to happen, but just not yet.
Just too early.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, too early would be your prediction, Jonathan, which is that Slack would get acquired in 2019.
It still will.
It did. It did go public in 2019, which was my big laugh at you, because I was like, well, they're about to go public. They're going to IPO, and they're going to make that $1 billion unicorn valuation into real tangible money for their investors, which they did. And then, of course, ironically enough, today, The Information posted an article about Slack getting acquired potentially sometime in 2020 as their prediction for 2020. So again, you are ahead of the time. Other more reputable news sources than us have now stated that they also believe Slack will get acquired due to dwindling profits and revenue growth against the likes of Team.
Yeah, I think Slack. I think it still will be acquired. I'm sure there'll be. Their stock is valued at like 40% what it was during their IPO. So that can't be good news for anybody. And really, the value of Slack is not in the technology. The value of Slack is in the ecosystem they built. So I think it's easy for somebody to steal that away. It's going to feature in my list of predictions for 2020 for sure.
It is pretty incredible, though. I mean, we still work with like 100%, maybe 95% of our customers over Slack. I feel like I saw those numbers that their adoption rates are slowing, but they're still growing at a huge clip, and we see them everywhere.
Yeah, I think they're in most companies and most enterprises. I don't know if they're necessarily enterprise-wide tools, but I think they have definitely a niche in development teams and operational teams. And you see the integrations with AWS and Azure and Google. They're all adopting Slack as a great way to do chat ops. I just think it still has adoption. It just might not become an enterprise play for the entire enterprise in some companies. And I think that's where teams may have some input. But I still see it everywhere in tech. So, but I do hope that maybe they start talking about their pricing model, because I still think their pricing model is flawed in many ways. At $21 a user per month, that's pretty pricey for the top end enterprise models versus teams. I think that is a blocker to larger adoption.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Peter, I can't really validate yours, but you believe that container-based models will continue to get more adoption than serverless. And this was based entirely on Foghorn resources, all your Kubernetes resources were super busy, but that you felt that would continue to be the case for 2020. So I don't know how your resource utilization has been for 2020 or 2019.
No, it's totally Kubernetes.
But if it's still Kubernetes, then I guess you were maybe right on this one.
Yeah, we saw way more work in container-based versus serverless. Although, that has a little to do with the fact that we do a lot more infrastructure than apps. So
I think we finally passed the point, though, where serverless might start getting a lot of adoption. I think with the ability to now commit resources to get away from cold start, the network changes that were made earlier in the year, I definitely feel like we're at a tipping point now where serverless might start taking a much more aggressive stance in a lot of enterprises and become much more of a first choice, because some of those limitations and issues that were blocking a widespread adoption have kind of moved on. And then you also predicted that the Japanese whiskey prices would go down, and I don't buy Japanese whiskey, so I can't comment on that.
They did not go down.
Did they go up, or did they stay flat?
No, I think they stayed flat. They stayed about flat. I think the $60 bottles that suddenly went up to 105 are still 105. Hopefully they go back down in 2020.
You could argue if the price didn't go up with inflation, the actual cost went down.
Nah, I'm not giving me that.
I'm not giving you either, but
I don't want it.
So, all right, so we'll give you the win, Peter, on this one. That you did call that you felt serverless would be lesser to Kubernetes, which I guess you were right on. So
I think he's right, because there was the announcement of EKS and VMware bought Pivotal, and there's definitely much more of a move in the industry to container-based deployments than serverless deployments. But at the same time, I think serverless is going to come in by stealth on the back end, because look at things like CloudWatch events, which are now adding events for all kinds of different scenarios, which can all trigger lambdas, all trigger serverless things or step functions. So I think eventually serverless is going to win. Everything that happens is happening because of a trigger, which is really just an event. Serverless will win. That's my gamble.
I agree. I think serverless will eventually become the leader, but we're not there yet. I think Kubernetes probably has a couple of years before it really reaches that point where people are like, why are we messing with all these containers and these hosts and these different things when we can just run functions as service or as native code or whatever else. But we'll see. Well, while we were not very good at announcements for 2019 or predictions, the vendors did have their big announcements in 2019, and so each of us have picked 3 of our favorite announcements. I have picked across all 3 providers. I don't know about Peter, and it looks like Jonathan did also all 3 providers as well. And since I wrote the list, I will go first.
Go ahead. Please do.
And so my first favorite announcement of 2019 was Google Anthos. I think it's a fantastic way for Google to get adoption into the enterprise space across multiple cloud providers. It really helps GKE maintain a dominant position in the Kubernetes space. I think it opens a conversation up for Google to be able to take advantage of customers who are already on the cloud in a much bigger way. And I think it's probably the most fully thought out strategy for how to be multi-cloud with Kubernetes of any of the 3 providers. So that was my first one.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think eventually Azure and AWS will follow with a similar type of offering. I don't think Outpost is quite it, because it requires a lot of, well, I'll say a lot of upfront expense in terms of hardware and actually having a data center presence to deploy the thing. But I will also acknowledge that Anthos is not cheap itself, with like $10K a month minimum commitment. So
yeah, and I kind of expect that maybe we'll see that change this year. That was the typical cost of trying not to get widespread adoption, but enough adoption to prove it out and break out the bugs, and then you'll lower the price and more adoption will come in the future is my guess there. But yeah, I know you did predict that AWS has something similar. I do think EKS ending up on-premise or in different clouds would be really interesting, and I do hope that happens in the future, but we'll see. Azure kind of has that a little bit with AKS already. You can run AKS in multiple places, but still not quite there at the level of Anthos. So that is what it is. So, Peter, how about you? What was your first 2019 favorite announcement?
Yeah, so I went with very less visionary and more practical ones that really affected a lot of the projects we did. So the first one, actually 2 of them I did that. The first one would be Transit Gateway effectively getting direct connect and interregion peering, making it a viable replacement for doing the building your own transit network on Amazon with virtual appliances, which really simplifies deployments where we're doing the multi-region, multi-account deployments.
Is it visionary? Is it kind of... it kind of seems like they should have had that all along. I was very disappointed that they didn't have direct connect support and they didn't have interregion peering and all these things which Google have already got in their own network. So do you think it was more of a catch-up thing? Or
Oh, it's total catch up. I think this is tech debt from being the first cloud company, putting together your network strategy and not really knowing yet what customers we're going to want and how they're going to do it. And then finding out, oh no, we're going to have customers who need to use our accounts as blast radius, which means our networking is going to be massively complex to get all of these workloads on the same virtual network. And so, that was super painful, I think, for lots of customers. This gives a much less painful method of getting over that hump. But yeah, I account it to being the first to market and tech debt associated with that.
Definitely. I mean, especially if you look at some of the limits of things, you can almost imagine how they implemented some of these networking constructs sort of on the back end. The limits of sort of 200, and that there's 8 bits of information somewhere storing something, and they've kept those last 55 for themselves.
Yeah.
Things like that, and that's a hard constraint when they say it's a hard constraint. So yeah, it's definitely good to see this stuff. I kind of wonder if they're going to reinvent the whole VPC idea at some point so they can really deploy global networks, because this is still very regional but glued together in a clunky kind of way.
Yep.
Maybe IPv6 will help them solve that.
Yeah.
Hopefully. All right, Jonathan, how about you?
So I think my pick for Google is their explainable AI. They were the first people to come out with a way to help describe how machine learning models have come to their conclusions. It's going to be especially useful for healthcare, where you have to justify exactly how the tool you've built comes to its conclusions and is repeatable.
That's such a great point.
Yeah, you look at what happened with Amazon and their model they built, which was fantastic for helping screen candidates, and it was found to discriminate against women. And so something like this tool would help show that the gender of an applicant was a key component in the decision making, and especially when it comes to healthcare, you've got lots of different inputs, lots of different factors that you're measuring about patients. You can start to use the model to sort of give you information back about which were the most important factors in leading to outcomes. So is it age, obesity, or something else? You can say, well, if it's age, nothing we can do about that. If it's obesity, we can help people lose weight. If it's something else, we can help people solve those problems. So I think it's sort of twofold. One, it helps with approval of solutions, and secondly, it can help the medical profession with actually sort of honing in on the causes of these outcomes and addressing those things before they become problems to begin with.
I'm just imagining an ad for a new drug on TV. we're not sure how it works.
Side effects might include data exposure through a public S3 bucket, over analysis of serverless, and containerization of Kubernetes. Yeah. Those are all side effects.
There's definitely a huge move of healthcare into the cloud space, and especially using the AI and machine learning models to sort of help identify problems early on. So I think although this is going to be especially helpful in healthcare, it's definitely useful for any kind of AI model in finding out exactly how it works. And Amazon followed suit. They released a similar thing, and I think Azure did as well. But Google first, so they get my kudos for the year.
All right. Well, my second one for 2019 favorite announcement was the Azure Tardigrade. Mostly because I think the name of this is pretty cool. The concept of basically using machine learning and AI to proactively address hardware failures before it impacts Azure's uptime, which, as you guys know, Azure's uptime is not one of the better of the three. And so they are doing a lot of work and a lot of different things to try to drive improvements in their infrastructure, which is all part of their Tardigrade project. And it's just really great computer science, engineering, thought process put together, and some really great blog posts about it. So overall, I think that was my favorite Azure announcement. I could talk all about Ultra Box disks and all those things too, and how amazing those are, but I think the Tardigrade is much cooler. Peter, number 2?
My second one was the announcement of DocumentDB with Mongo compatibility. Mostly because of its setting the direction where this business model of open core and enterprise features is going to be the sort of the new SaaS model, and it really put the challenge to those companies to potentially have to find a new business model.
Equally, I suppose you could talk about Elasticsearch
Yep.
in the same bucket. Yeah.
Definitely interesting, especially how much flack they have gotten for DocumentDB with MongoDB compatibility. I have really enjoyed making you say the whole thing multiple times in the lightning round through 2019. So it has given me immense pleasure just for that alone. So that is a great number 2 as well.
So my second was on the reInvent announcements, which I was really impressed with, and it's the AWS partnership with Verizon for the Wavelength service, which provides compute and storage right at the edge of the cell phone network. And I think it's great that 5G has always promised millisecond latencies to at least the cell phone towers, but without compute and without storage there, it's fairly useless. So by providing either outposts or some kind of technology which can provide the compute and storage services at the edge, it was kind of useless. I think Amazon have been, I think they're in the right time at the right place to be there to help enable a new sort of series of applications, especially gaming, things like that.
I do hope that the 5G lives up to the hype. The amount of noise in the market from Verizon and T-Mobile and these guys trying to come to the first 5G network and how 5G is going to be revolutionary. I hope it's more than just faster networking to my cell phone and faster edge computing from AWS. I hope it actually can deliver the hype. But yeah, definitely interesting and really nice to see this announcement from AWS at reInvent around it.
Marketing is just a nightmare when it comes to technology. And AT&T jump on the bandwagon saying they've got 5G services when they really don't. T-Mobile did roll out a 5G low bandwidth service in their 600 megahertz band that they paid a fortune for nationwide, in the US at least. And Verizon haven't done the same thing, but they have some smaller, localized within cities, high bandwidth solutions, because high bandwidth requires an access point, many per square mile, whereas the T-Mobile 600 megahertz band is designed for rural areas, and that thing can travel for miles. So they're completely different technologies. They're definitely both improvements on 4G, but in two different directions. One is access over greater distances, and one is access at high bandwidth. But in general, I think Amazon have definitely made a really smart choice with.
All right, my third one is the EKS CloudWatch Container Insights from Amazon. This is a really fantastic CloudWatch dashboard that kind of gives you insight into everything going on in your containers. We run the CloudPod website on containers, and I run a bunch of other websites on containers as well. And so it's really nice to be able to get a really nice dashboard without not a lot of work. And it just really shows you kind of the power of where CloudWatch can go as it starts moving up the stack and trying to add some of these more value-add features beyond just CPU and memory and disk and events. So this is super exciting for me. I really enjoy this feature, and I've used it at work. I've used it on my personal projects. And so this was my third for 2019 top announcements.
Wow, I didn't see that coming. It's definitely a cool feature. Do you think it was the best feature, or just your personal best feature?
Well, it's my personal feature.
Okay.
There's other cool features that came out this year too.
All right.
It's just my personal favorite. So, I mean, I don't know about wavelength, but you're excited about it, so I'm not gonna mark you down because you're excited about something I'm not. I'm like, come on, Jonathan. Jeez.
He's rough on you.
Crowd.
Yeah.
Man.
Logging.
Right.
Oh, come on.
It's beyond logging though. It's the metrics and the systems, and it really gives you a lot of insights into ECS in a way that you were missing before, without a lot of manual code. So it's just a lot of elimination of debt, in my opinion. So.
Okay.
I'm going to piggyback with you though, because the announcement I picked was much less exciting from a feature standpoint. It was EKS getting an SLA of 3 nines. But to me, it kind of signified that we're now allowed to run production workloads on it. And EKS was a significant portion of our 2019 learning curve. So it's pretty cool to start migrating production workloads there and see that service become mature.
I mean, definitely glad to see the 3 nines availability. I do hope that gets improved. I think 4 or 5 nines for their backplane would be really nice to have. But definitely improvements all across the board. So glad to see that one as well.
Yeah.
All right, Jonathan, wow us with your third pick, since you didn't like CloudWatch Container Insights.
I think my third pick for Microsoft, at least that's my last provider, was just their general support for the developers in general, including the acquisition of GitHub and the implementation of GitHub Actions, all the DevOps tooling that they've come up with in the past 12 months. It's been fantastic. I think it definitely shows a change in direction for them as a company. And I'll put aside the fact that they changed the licensing model to make it more expensive to run things like SQL Server on other providers. We'll brush that under the rug. But I think they do seem to have changed their motivations a little. And going after developers the way they are is probably a really smart move for them.
2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yep.
That's what the licensing thing was.
It's okay, at least net forward.
I actually was looking at the Azure DevOps items as well, and I almost had those on my list, but I felt the tardigrade kind of beat that one out. So glad to see you pick that one up.
Cool.
Then you have an honorable mention. I don't have one mostly because 3 was hard enough to pick. So, but what was your honorable mention, Jonathan?
So I couldn't decide, and I was kind of happy to see that Microsoft finally gave up on Edge as a browser. They've been trying so hard for about 20 years to compete with everybody else in the browser space, but actually admitting that the game is over and they're going to pivot to a Chromium-based solution is probably great for everybody. I think it makes the web an easier place to work with when most browsers are now Chromium compatible, so good for them.
Yeah, but now we don't get Silverlight.
Oh.
And we don't get Flash either after 2020, so, let's shed a private tear someplace for those things and let's move on. Hey everyone, Jonathan here. I just wanted to take a minute to thank the cloud consulting gurus at Foghorn for helping make the Cloud Pod possible. These folks truly get it. Cloud consulting experts since 2008, they are premier tier partners with AWS, Google Cloud Platform Silver, and Microsoft Azure partners. From multi-cloud to containers to moving full production workloads to the cloud under the tightest compliance, Foghorn's team of full-stack cloud engineers have been there, done that, gotten the t-shirt, and are ready to share their experience with you. If you're in the market for some talent to supplement your team, visit www.fogops.io/thecloudpod. www.fogops.io/thecloudpod. Foghorn, the promise of cloud delivered.
All right, well, moving on to our crystal ball section here on the 2020 predictions. So my 2020 prediction was that AWS and Microsoft will spend a large amount of money, development and marketing dollars to make EKS and AKS feel comparable or compatible with GKE for Kubernetes workloads. And so I think this is just going to be a large amount of investment in features and capabilities for AKS and EKS to really get that parity with GKE that they are lacking. So there you go. That's my 2020 prediction for this year.
How are you going to measure that, though? Marketing, advertising, that kind of thing, or
I think you'll see in features, and features mean they're spending money on it, and marketing dollars are not going to look at their earnings statement to see how much they spent on marketing for that because they don't break that out. But I do feel that you're going to see a very large investment in these areas, and you'll see a lot of new features, new capabilities that are in many ways GKE competitive checkbox features, as well as new things that kind of separate the paradigm. I think you're already starting to see a little bit with Fargate for EKS. I think that's kind of the very first step into that direction, and I think you'll start seeing a lot of interesting things from both of them.
Yeah, good choice.
I'm on the Kubernetes bandwagon too. I forgot that was one of my predictions last year, but mine this year was that the number of Kubernetes workloads will double this year. So that should be almost impossible to validate, but
I was gonna say,
it's a
do you have
number.
access to analyst report that I could leverage?
That's what I'm thinking. There might be one somewhere. There might be one.
There might be a Gartner report or a Forrester or Wave out there somewhere that will talk about this.
I guess you could look up the number of bugs logged against Kubernetes or something like that. More people using it, more bugs logged.
That's what I was looking at. I was thinking, can I do downloads? I could do stars, but then that doesn't count for all the managed services running Kubernetes, like those customers. So I didn't think that made a lot of sense. But bugs might be a good one.
How many more ways can we come up with how to deploy Kubernetes in 2020? I think would be between VMware and GKE, AKS, EKS, and then Minikube and all those. It seems like every week someone's coming up with a new way to deploy Kubernetes to make it simpler for you.
Yeah, I really wanted some kind of VMware announcement for my 2020 prediction, especially around the pivotal acquisition, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was going to be because they already had a Kubernetes offering of sorts, And I think the Pivotal acquisition kind of helps solidify their place in the market and all that kind of junk. So I don't know. I couldn't quite solidify what they were going to do with it other than just try and gain a bit of market share for the on-prem areas. So I didn't go with any kind of Kubernetes for my first choice, but I still think Slack is going to be acquired by somebody.
Nice. That is so great.
They will. Like the stock.
You've doubled down on it, especially with that information article today. It was inevitable.
Double down. They're worth 40% what they were a year ago. I don't think their technology is anything to write home about. I think they're in a bubble, and they will be replaced by somebody, and they will be acquired by somebody.
If anyone from Slack is listening, I'd like to sponsor the Cloud Pod. We'll omit this section from the 2020 predictions.
Well, they can certainly afford to sponsor the Cloud Pod at $21 a user, but
Yes, indeed.
It's hard to compete against Freenode and other IRC-based solutions, and I know that they have other value adds, especially around the application integrations and the sort of enterprise features that they have. But still, I don't think those differentiate them enough.
Do you have anything else for 2020 you want to mention here, or are you going to just stick with Slack, double down?
Oh, did you? I thought we were going to have like a whole go around 3 times thing again. Okay, so I think
just one pick for 2020.
Oh, one pick. Oh, well, I got 3 picks for 2020.
Oh, interesting.
Well, I mean, you can make the other 2 honorable mentions, or you can make Slack an honorable mention.
Okay, Slack is the honorable mention, and I'll move that to the end, or not, as the case may be. But I think AWS will push into the African continent. In terms of data centers, there are 3 big economies in the African continent. There's Tanzania, Kenya, and the Democratic Republic of Congo in Kinshasa. They're all huge economies. I think in the next 50 years-ish, I think around about 50% of the population of the world is going to live in Africa. It would be very short-sighted to not get a foothold there as soon as possible. And I think that the next AWS data centers will and should be in Africa somewhere.
And so this is beyond the Cape Town region, which is already announced.
Beyond, many more. I think.
So, do you think those will be local regions, like this new LA thing, or do you think they'll be full-blown regions?
No, I think they'll have to be full regions. I think there's enough people there and enough business there and enough money there now to warrant full regions.
Okay.
I mean, Google have already kind of hinted that that's where they're going with their sort of optical fibers that they run down the side of Africa, and the 100 gigabit connections they've got to various places. So I think AWS will respond with local data centers or data centers at least in that continent.
All right.
Yep. And my final prediction. I'm hedging my bets here just a little bit, but AWS have announced their Graviton ARM-based CPUs. Azure haven't done anything with that at all. Google definitely use ARM internally because they're Android testing and stuff, but I think this year they will announce RISC-V-based architecture instances, not ARM-based instances. I think they've been kind of sitting on that a little bit while they're working on the technology, but I see this year a new instance class.
Why do you feel that they would go RISC-V versus ARM?
For financial reasons. I mean, ARM's pretty expensive, but they're the only viable people in the market until a few years ago. And RISC-V is still upcoming technology. Google has sponsored some of the RISC-V works up to date. So I think I understand why Azure haven't really gone down the ARM path, like the Windows, the ARM-based Windows. Mini laptops and things didn't work at all. Amazon have definitely gone with Graviton and the Nitro platform, and that works very well. I think Google have notably not gone with anything ARM publicly yet. So I think it's because they're waiting for some new tech to come along, and I think that's going to be RISC-V.
All right. Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
There's advantages and disadvantages to that. One is that if you can differentiate yourself, then that's somewhat helpful. But if it's also the risky part, it's the same thing of PowerPC compute chips versus Intel power compute chips, and Apple made that bet and ended up regretting it and going to Intel eventually. Now they're predicted to go to ARM first as one of the first players to make the pivot. Going with a different technology, processor architecture is a risk, but it also, if it has significant advantages over ARM, then it makes sense to take that bet. But we'll see how that works out. It didn't work out for PowerPC.
It didn't work out, but it did work out for Apple. I mean, Apple have pivoted 3 times now to different CPU architectures, and they've done that very successfully. So I think Google could do the same thing.
Yeah.
When you build a container with a set of instructions, it doesn't matter what the underlying CPU is. It's the same instructions either way.
I look forward to dealing with compile errors again in the world. Like all that noise that we used to make back in the 90s and all these different compute platforms and processor stacks and compilation errors, and we're going right back to it. It's a full circle.
One of the additional motivations is going to be that Intel have clearly got a lot of bugs in their.
Well,
in
Intel's
their cores.
clearly stuck. I mean, like they have no hope for Moore's law and with their architecture and being able to continue down that path. And why they keep developing chips with more and more cores, that's not really moving the needle. They can't get their 13 nanometer or 11 nanometer chip fab working. Like they have a lot of problems. So it makes sense that someone's going to replace Intel because an x86 is our architecture because Intel can't do it. But yeah, RISC versus ARM or not, I don't know about that area.
Yeah, and I was kind of torn actually between AMD and RISC for Google because I've been a great fan of AMD for the past couple of years. I've invested in AMD.
Oh, wow.
And that's kind of worked out quite nicely for me. But I think RISC is where they're going to go because of the additional savings for power consumption, and that's going to become more expensive as time goes on. I guess ultimately the consumer doesn't care what the platform is that it runs on. They just want it to be cheap and performant.
Yeah, and long battery life, right? Which means efficient.
Yep, exactly. I do look forward to ARM-based Macs. I think that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, I think so too. Most large organizations run 6 or even more monitoring tools. Each of them uses a mixture of data collection techniques from technology providers, open source communities, or custom integrations, and maintaining dozens of integrations across these tools can be a significant investment. Blue Medora introduces BindPlane, not another monitoring platform, but the industry's first monitoring integration as a service. BindPlane can gather data from over 150 technology data sources spanning your entire organization. Remove or reduce your reliance on expensive monitoring and SIM solutions by sending log data to Google Stackdriver, New Relic, or Azure Monitor. Check out the extensive list of integrations, all provided at no additional cost. Learn more and sign up for a free trial by visiting bluemedora.com/cloudpod. The link's available in our show notes, and as a bonus for CloudPod listeners, Blue Medora are offering Google Compute Platform credits to help get you started. BindPlane. Seamlessly stream hybrid cloud and on-premise metric and log data.
All right, well, that's it for our 2019 look back and our 2020 look ahead. Let's touch on some news here. So first of all, in general news, VMware has completed the acquisition of Pivotal. This was announced at VMworld, and this was a large acquisition to basically help them get a bigger foothold into Kubernetes. Really beyond this acquisition close, there's really no news here yet. But we will hopefully see something at VMworld this year, as well as VMworld Europe, as they start integrating Pivotal into the VMware ecosystem and what that means for Kubernetes on VMware, which I think is going to be their big focus for 2020.
VMware have been buying up a bunch of companies over the past year, especially, but even going back further than that, they bought Bitfusion, Bitnami, AVI Networks, and I guess a few other people who I can't remember right now. But they're clearly well aware that the time of the local data center, the private data center, is almost up, and so they're diversifying, and it's good to see them being very proactive about this.
I think they are looking for that next billion-dollar business, and so they've made a bunch of these acquisitions, hoping those will become potentially viable, something bigger.
Oh yeah, I mean, actually, Carbon Black was one of the big ones last year that there's really we haven't heard any news about yet, but
yeah, I suspect that we'll start seeing more and more of that as well. But I think they had to get disconnected from the fact that they want all this stuff to live inside of VMware. I think once they get it to the point where it's standalone and it's VMware software but not tied to VMware and vSphere, I think that's when they can start breaking free. But that's what they haven't quite got yet. Because they did have an antivirus program before they bought Carbon Black. It was part of the hypervisor stack. But you required ESX first. And so, it's a license and expense that you had to have just have antivirus. So.
I kind of wonder, that what their portfolio now includes storage, security, containers, all kinds of different things.
Well, they own Wavefront as well,
Yeah.
if you remember, and they also own a cloud cost management vendor.
I mean, if they were to pivot from being focused on enabling people build private data centers to actually being their own hyperscaler.
Well, they tried that with Hyper-V or Hyper-V, whatever that Verizon thing was that was awful. And vCloud Air, if you recall.
vCloud Air.
While they had a chance to be that, I think I prefer them not to try again because they screwed it up pretty badly the first time around.
Well, I'm going to be very interested to follow how the integration goes because that's going to be a big one.
Well, Amazon EKS has enabled network access restrictions to the Kubernetes cluster public endpoints. This allows you to restrict access to the Kubernetes cluster with something as simple as a security group for your IPv4 address range, which you can notate inside orientation. EKS supports both public and private endpoints, but previously, if you made it public, there was no way to restrict that access in any way. And so this new security group capability allows you to at least add a little bit of restrictions to that to make it not so public. That's a pretty simple solution for a problem that they should have had to release. Azure has been very quiet. They took Christmas off, so thank you, Azure.
Yeah.
And Google has had a few articles here. So the first one is the new GCP Foundation build out with automation. This is a new toolkit called the Cloud Foundation Toolkit, which was released by GCP and partners to help you accelerate your cloud journey. This includes modules for the popular Terraform framework, as well as for the native cloud deployment manager on Google. The deployment manager code is a monorepo with a large number of templates for your developer references, and the Terraform modules are available to you on a dedicated GitHub organization, and also available through the Terraform module registry. Some of the most popular options include Project Factory to create opinionated GCP projects with shared VPCs, IAMs, and APIs, IAM capabilities, VPCs, and GKE, all available to you out of the box in a quick, easy-to-use Terraform module or deployment manager code. So it's pretty nice.
Excellent.
Get everyone on the bandwagon.
Well, today, or actually yesterday, was the first day of the California Consumer Privacy Act, or the CCPA, and Google has released a white paper for you on how you can be compliant with both GCP and the G Suite product line. There's some new tools and support enable you to comply with your consumers' rights, including helping access, export, or delete data that you or your users put into G Suite or GCP systems. And these resources are available to you on the CCPA compliance page, now available to you.
Yeah, pretty close to GDPR. If you've already done GDPR,
pretty close. It's a GDPR light, as I like to call it. It's not quite as restrictive as GDPR, but it's definitely something that you're going to have to deal with if you are 25 million or more in revenue and you have customers or consumers' data. You will be beholden to the CCPA. So definitely check your compliance team's interpretations of the law before you think you're safe.
Yeah, because it's as simple as gathering and maintaining ownership or tracking IP addresses from your marketing automation. So, yeah, I mean, even we did it, even though we're not big enough to qualify.
It's just better to be safe than sorry, in my opinion. We have, I think, all of the GDPR stuff on the CloudPod website for that exact reason. Just better to be safe than sorry. Yep. And then the last big announcement from Google was there's new NOAA, or National or Oceanic Association data sets available on the Google Cloud. Over 5 petabytes of data is available across Google services, including BigQuery, Cloud Storage, Google Earth Engine, and Kaggle. The data is available to you at no cost, but you will incur standard processing, egress if you use your own data charges. And the data includes real-time satellite imagery with more than 20 years worth of national water models, historic storm event data, and aggregate lightning strike data. So it's awesome if you're interested in checking out some of this data from the NOAA. They do have a fun example project, which is the acoustic detection of humpback whales, which they have available to you as a blog post that tells you about how they use this data to track humpback whales across the Earth. So pretty neat. All right. So we were skipping the lightning round this week. We were taking this week off, but we have a segment here called Ask TCP, or Ask the Cloud Pod. And so we asked those of our users in the Slack channel. If you're not part of our Slack channel, head to the cloudpod.net Slack channel to join us and chat with us about the show and get notifications of different events and things that are happening, when we'll be at things like Google Next and where we'll be at. That's all posted into our Slack channel, and we love to communicate with you, our listeners, and see where you're at, see how you found us, and learn what you like about the show and what you don't like about it. We love the feedback. So we asked for questions, and we got a good selection of questions from a few different people. And so I will ask these, and I will let you guys just kind of jump in and answer them as you see appropriate. And if you don't answer, I will try to answer as best I can. So the first one is from Ian McKay. Ian McKay was a guest last year on the show. He is, of course, the author of CloudFormer. And actually, I was looking around for some other tool the other day, and I found another EMK tool on, I think it was for Visual Studio Code as a plugin. And I was like, oh, it's Ian's code, so that's pretty cool. But he is asking, will we see no code in 2020? This is, of course, the idea that Amazon and Microsoft and others are working apparently on a way to do coding without, it does not require you to know how to code. And so this would be sort of a visual editor, I assume, or some way to basically abstract away the coding concept and just talk about objects or different things you want to do and how you want to modify them, I guess. And then that would basically create code that will run somewhere in the cloud magically. And so there was a rumor that it would happen at reInvent, that they would announce this. They've apparently been hiring for the last year engineers to help build this no-code solution at AWS as well as at Microsoft. And so his question is, again, will we see no code in 2020?
I think we will see a very limited no code in 2020, and I think it won't be, hey Alexa, create me an application that does this, and then you describe what it does. I think you think about things like business data, BDAs, that kind of thing. You know, they build reports, they build solutions which pull business data out of a known schema to answer specific questions. I think we'll get hey Alexa, what was my top, who was my top customer this quarter, or what was my growth this quarter, and that kind of natural language type application for very specific data sets. But I don't think this year is going to be the year when you can ask an AI tool to build you an application that does literally anything.
Yeah, I see. I'm sure we'll see tools come out, and it's just they're going to remind me of like business objects, and they're going to
exactly crystal reports, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that, and or they're going to come out with something that reminds me a whole lot of Visual Basic.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, there've been these trends toward like rapid application development platforms. And I don't know, I feel like, maybe we have a little blip in companies investing in that and seeing what they can do. But I think longer term, the answer is more that we're going to teach our business analysts how to code.
I think for me, there are some security concerns around something like this, because without actually having good controls over access to the data that you're driving your application with, how do you stop people accessing data that they shouldn't?
I would actually argue that I think you have already seen the beginnings of no code. I think it was announced at reInvent a little bit quietly as part of the SageMaker IDE. And I think that is where they're going to tackle no code first, because I think the people who are doing big data and AI, they don't want to do a lot of code work. They just want to deal with their data models, and the way that they've written many of the SageMaker capabilities that they announced, those are a lot of no-code capabilities. And so I think they actually are going to see no-code come into the products in a way that you weren't expecting it to be. It's not going to be like, here's the new no-code editor or whatever else. I think it's become features that you see on top of existing things like SageMaker.
It's just nothing in there. It's the no-code editor. There's nothing in there.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing in there. Yeah. So, but I think the visualizations, ability to do experiments, the ability to do these things, and abstract away all of the complicated code logic that was required for big data machine learning, I think that is the beginning of what you're seeing for no code already. That's kind of my take on it at this point. But I do think you'll start seeing more of it in 2020.
It very much depends what you mean by code. Are you talking literally C, C++, .NET, C#, Python, Java? Are you specifically talking about those things as being code? Or are you talking about any language, any formal language as being code? Like, where is the line?
I think that's where we're going to see. But I think I think it's going to be a new paradigm of what they think no code is going to be. I don't think it's going to be like JavaScript or things that we've seen forever. I think it's going to be more abstract, and I don't mean Visual Studio for Excel. I mean, like it'll be something that, if you click into show source, you'll see source code and actual JavaScript, but it's all dynamically generated for you in some type of other way through a rapid coding environment of some sort.
Maybe. I think Peter kind of hit the nail on the head with Visual Basic kind of thing. But if you think about things like FileMaker Pro going back 20 years, they were kind of a no-code way of, or at least a low-code way of coding applications. It was all data-driven.
You know what happened to that platform?
No.
FileMaker 2 had a little bit of code. FileMaker 3 had a little bit more code capabilities.
Because what happens is people want to do more complicated things. But these tools still exist too. Like FileMaker Pro is still a product you can buy. It's still owned by Apple. There's QuickBase. There's Beeswax. There's a bunch of other things out there that will help you do these type of things. With a forms engine and some type of input capability. But yeah, I still think it's a little bit too defined. But I definitely think we've already started to see some of it. That's my take.
So maybe my answer for the question is it really depends what you mean by no code. I think maybe by the end of 2020 we'll understand more about what no code actually could mean.
Yeah, that's probably a good clarification that we'll get. All right, the next question, I think it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Rob Martin asks, will Oracle Cloud take over as the top hyperscaler cloud during the first half of 2020 or the second half of 2020? And I'm going to go with neither. But I do think this is going to be the year that we see this large investment Oracle's been making in their cloud start to bite them in a pretty heavy way. We just talked about how NetSuite is kind of the only reason why they're still a growth stock in any way. I think the Wall Street's going to start penalizing them for the amount of money they're making in Oracle Cloud and the investment there, and I think that'll be interesting over the next several months to see how that starts to shake out. And does that end up resulting in someone like Larry stepping away from Oracle and retiring, like we hope he does someday? But I think I don't think there's any hope that Oracle will become the top hyperscaler cloud during any time in 2020.
Probably not. And anyone who follows me on Twitter, all 69 of you. Will have seen my response to the question about what 2050 was going to bring, and my prediction was that Larry Ellison's head in a jar would still be touting the virtues of Oracle Cloud, even though they're being bought out and sent to the sun by Alibaba. So yeah, I
but
don't
it's
think
next gen. But it's next gen.
It's next gen cloud. Next gen cloud. Rob also asked another question here, which is that we kind of predicted that we see flexible CPU and flexible memory instances at reInvent, and it wasn't announced. As we were all sad about that. And he was thinking that there'd be a new instance type, and so he was thinking, is this still coming from AWS or Azure, or are they going to take a different route altogether? And my feeling at this point, because it didn't happen this year at reInvent, is that it's not going to happen. Maybe Azure will do something, but I think it's a lot of infrastructure to change. There's a lot of capabilities to do things. Maybe Nitro will eventually get there, but I don't think you'll see it for anything existing, and I don't think you'll see it for any of the new, Gravitron-based versions of these instances. So if it is, it'll be a totally new instance type, but I don't know if we'll see it in 2020 at all.
I've actually looked at the combinations of CPU and memory available from AWS. And if you look at the compute optimized versus the memory optimized versus the general instances versus the R instances, which are meant for databases, I think almost every combination of CPU and memory is already available.
Yeah.
And so while it would be nice to be able to choose your instance by CPU and memory rather than having to know which instance that mapped to, I don't think AWS is going to change. I think the savings plans are much more intended to be the migration path for people from EC2 to serverless. I think they want to discourage people from committing to EC2 spend because they want people to migrate their workloads to Lambda and to EKS or Fargate eventually.
Well, and really at the end of the day, did you want flexible instance types because you wanted better pricing, or did you want it because you actually needed that capacity in that certain size? Where I think savings plan eliminated a lot of the savings portions of that story. And then if really at the end of the day, if you have your workload that only needs 1 or 2 CPUs and only 2 gigs of memory, then I think you're right. Ask the question, why isn't this running in a Lambda function?
Yep.
Yeah, I did not see this as a pain point for customers. And that's usually what's driving their...
I saw it as a pain point before savings plan where people wanted different costing models and different ways to buy compute to lower their costs, but with savings plan now and all that, I don't see it as big of a need.
In a way, containerization of applications makes it kind of a moot point, because so you buy the biggest instances and you pack it full of containers which make the most of the memory and CPU available, and you've already solved the problem. You're no longer wasting anything at that point. So it's kind of I don't think it's a problem to solve anymore.
Yeah, well, and you kind of get this solved with Fargate too, right? Because if you put it into a container, I can run the Fargate container any size I want.
Yeah, and I think that the transparent movement of workloads from EKS to Fargate or ECS to Fargate would really help sort of solve this for everybody.
Moving on to the next question. Will Google break out GCP's numbers and or will we see an Amazon Web Services spinoff? And this is from Derek Helmick. I do not think we will see a Google breakout of GCP's numbers. I do think we might see Azure do it this year in 2020. But I don't think Google's anywhere close enough yet to want to start championing their numbers in any serious way.
Exactly.
Especially with only 7%. But Azure, they're getting to the point now where they might start wanting to break it out for reasons. If it makes, especially with all that money they might be getting from the Pentagon for the Jedi contract, maybe they want to start touting that in a bigger way. So I think you'll see Azure do it before you see Google do it. Is 2020 the year? 50-50 shot. And then on the second question, will we see an AWS spinoff? I'm going to go with no, only because even if we get into an anti-monopoly type lawsuit court case, it won't get settled in 2020. It won't get settled till 2021 at least. So if there's a spinoff, it'll be forced in 2021.
I think Google will only break out GCP numbers if they are incredibly good at growth over the next year, so they can say, hey, look how much we've improved in 12 months or something. I think the AWS spinoff is interesting. I think we're much more likely to see, not cloud specifically, but I think we're much more likely to see an Amazon spinoff from the rest of the marketplace and AWS infrastructure than we are to see an AWS spin-off. I think
as a retailer?
Yes, Amazon, the retailer, may spin off and leave everything else behind, but I don't see AWS spinning off and leaving the marketplace and Amazon as a retailer behind.
I don't see them doing any of that unless somebody makes.
I don't see them happening.
No, I don't think so either. But in order of least likely things, I think Amazon AWS spinning off is least likely.
I mean, there are so many advantages right now for them to stay as one company.
So many sins you can hide in that Amazon revenue. Both those questions came from Derek Helmick, by the way.
Thanks, Derek.
Our last few questions are from Wayne. Wayne is a pretty active data engineer, and he has the first one is: do we think we will see the first serverless data warehouse solution? He says he feels Snowflake is close, but not serverless. So I don't know if we'll see a serverless solution to Snowflake. I do think Amazon is threatened by Snowflake, and I do think they're working on something to compete with Snowflake in a big way. Is that a serverless solution? That's probably not in the cards for the first version, but definitely something, whatever they do to compete with Snowflake, it's going to get released as very server full, and then maybe over time becomes more serverless as it gets more maturity.
Is that question just for AWS?
I assume he's asking from a very AWS perspective, but you can answer it from any perspective.
Well, from a GCP perspective, I'd say we already have it with BigQuery.
See, I feel like the fact that he calls out Snowflake makes the question slightly more complicated, because I don't feel that BigQuery and Snowflake are comparable really in any way from what their solutions are and how they fix things. But I could see your argument either way.
So why? I mean, before I answer the question, I guess why do you guys feel that Snowflake has an edge over what AWS already has as native offerings?
Oh, I think the big thing for Snowflake is that it performance-wise, it beats the crap out of Redshift.
And and I've heard from my engineers that for scaling it up to run larger queries and then scaling back down is faster, which makes it more efficient from a cost perspective and easier.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's interesting actually because now you mentioned that part of it. Azure kind of has this now because they just released at Build their new data warehousing capability, which is very Snowflake-ish and is very serverless. So Azure's already got this they already have a solution, I think, for the data warehousing.
Is it more a matter of AWS keeping more metadata or more indexes or more caching of queries for Athena queries, things like that? I mean, what would they have to add to their existing tooling to be comparable with what Snowflake have?
Being able to get above 100 concurrent connections to Redshift would be the first step in that direction. But we'll see. So his second question is that he does point out that GCP has a fantastic serverless solution for data processing and data flow, but AWS's story of Glue is terrible. It takes forever to load and is highly limited. And do we predict a solution to fill the void? And I think on this one, I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, I haven't used Glue. I mean, Amazon's had a ton of these services sort of replace each other.
Mm-hmm. Again, it feels like an area that, the scale out step functions capability where you trade off durability for some performance capabilities. That gives you the ability to do a lot of glue type things with Kubernetes, or sorry, with ECS batch and those type of things, being able to do that on containers. That gives you a bunch of options on how to do this. I think glue is a little long in the tooth right now in comparative to some of the other technologies that come out with, but I wouldn't be surprised to see SageMaker doesn't come out with something in this area as well. So I think something will replace it. I just don't know if it'll be better or more of what you're looking for, Wayne. Okay, Jonathan, thanks for that.
I was in the middle of thinking about a sentence, honestly. There are really so many options, though, other than glue. I mean, even on the floor of reInvent, there were a bunch of ATL companies there who are definitely thriving in the space. I mean, there's Airflow, there's Illuma. What else is there? Apache, you've got some products like Kudu and Spark. I mean, even Spark can kind of competes with glue in some respects. So I don't know. I think glue is just a foot in the door for AWS, and I'm sure it will grow and become better over time, but it's going to take them a few years.
Yeah, and I mean, remember data pipeline was before glue.
Yeah.
Then Wayne's last question to us is, do we see a world of AWS or other providers doing auto cost optimization to help lower costs for all? And he says, I know this sounds weird to some, but it would open up avenues for us to explore new solutions whilst managing a tight budget without the need to keep a close eye on Cost Explorer, Cloud Health, or an accountant to hand you the information as you go. I think that is an interesting question. I do think we will see more optimizations start happening inside AWS, especially after Savings Plan kind of came to be. I think that eliminates a lot of the cost optimization challenges that you might have been having before. And if you're looking for predictability, which is the most common thing you're looking for in any type of cloud, that predictability of Savings Plan gives you flexibility and predictability, which I think is great. I think you will start seeing free tier standardization for AWS. I think you will see maybe some type of optimizations for longer running instances and giving you automatic discounts. I think that's what Google's attacking them with in the market. And so I think those are areas that they will try to adjust. And I do think you'll start seeing some more cost things, but auto cost optimization is a hard one because of the risks that you're taking to your application. And AWS in particular is not going to take an action on your system that potentially will cause downtime or impact your user experience, because that's not what they're interested in doing. So we'll see what that looks like. But I assume it'll be more of an accounting thing in the back end versus an actual shutting down instances or not. But I'll let Jonathan answer this as the author of a project we called Thor's Hammer, where we shut off a ton of infrastructure aggressively. I'm sure he has a better answer than I do.
I have a kind of slightly weird answer, because I think the challenge of any cloud provider is to be able to burst up to anybody's need when they need it, without having a bunch of waste. Without them having to pay for a bunch of extra capacity that nobody's using at the time. And so if I think about things like provisioned IOPS disks, I'd love to be able to pay for the IOPS I use, but not necessarily pay for those IOPS all the time. I'd like to see a middle ground between like the GP2 volumes and the IO1 volumes, where I can pay for some kind of burst rate up into high performance sometimes a day when I need it. But I think really, as Amazon specifically have put a lot of effort into emphasizing the need for cost savings, or at least optimization of things like instance types in their best practices models, in their well-architected models. I think mostly it's self-serving, because if you have a bunch of EC2 instances running and they're not doing a lot most of the time, they're also not using your other services. They're not using other APIs that cost money, like Recognition or S3 or any of these other things. So by optimizing the compute spend and by packing more people in, more customers in, more applications in, you sort of open up more opportunities for them to spend more money on your other products. And I think that's probably Amazon's motivation in all of this, is that they want to be able to fit more customers in using more services all the time. So as far as auto cost optimization, I don't think that they're going to do anything other than give recommendations. They certainly wouldn't change any infrastructure that you have. Maybe they will offer some kind of dynamic instance, even more so than the T2s or the T3s, where you sort of say, I want to be able to burst to this potentially, but only charge me the base rate most of the time. I think that's probably the beginnings of the step in that direction, but I don't see them doing anything other than what they're doing already as far as providing burstability into higher tiers, especially for things like DynamoDB and EC2.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that their motivation is in the right place. I think that if Amazon could offer that right away, they would. Totally agree with your point, Jonathan, that the more cost effective they make the platform for specific workloads, the more workloads become candidates to run there. And so it just makes the pie grow exponentially faster.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to do. We all know it's hard to do. You have to have context. You have to understand what you're trying to do to optimize your spend. It's not just about, clicking a magic button.
Yeah, and it's great when Trusted Advisor tells you that this instance that you have running has an average of 2% CPU utilization. But if I've got an instance running which is absolutely critical, and for 10 minutes every day, it needs to do this thing as fast as it possibly can, an average is meaningless to me. It doesn't mean anything, and I think understanding the workloads is going to be more important, which I think is kind of why serverless is the key to this whole thing, because once you break out these things into serverless functions, you know that when that thing is running, it's the most important thing that needs to run at that very moment in time.
Yes. So, I by the way, long term, I think I agree 100% that that's the true cloud native model. Run your functions in the cloud, just like you would on a mainframe.
Charge me per instruction.
Yeah, just like a mainframe.
Exactly.
Zero service.
To Justin's point, the way Google provide discounts for long-running instances, I think is really fantastic, and I wish AWS would do the same thing. Automatically apply discounts as instances age, and it becomes obvious that they're long-running. It becomes obvious that you're committed to running this thing for a certain length of time without having to go to the effort of buying an RI or a savings plan.
Yep.
I mean, at the end of the day, what your CFO wants is predictability. Cost optimization is actually really not what they want. They just want to know that if you're going to spend, $5 million a month, that you actually only spend $5 million a month. And so I think it's really where it's going to be more interesting to see how Amazon makes the spend more predictable and less destructive when someone spends on something that you didn't expect, and how do you manage that more effectively. But we'll see. I do hope to see more improvements here. Like I said, I wish to see a better free plan. I do wish to see auto discounts for long-running instances. I think that would be a big advantage, especially when you already have things like no upfront reservations and things like that. What's the risk of Amazon saying, "Well, we're just going to guarantee this for the rest of the month automatically and give you a better price"?
Yep.
Well, good. That is all of the questions. We'd love to make this a normal segment on the show, so do join the Slack channel if you can, and ask those questions to us, and we'll include one or two in every week if people ask those questions, and we would love to have that as a regular segment. So that was lots of fun. Thanks again, guys, for giving us your 2019 predictions and where we're going in 2020, and that's it for this edition of the Cloud Pod.
Excellent. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I did notice that the vendors are starting to make announcements again, so they are back from their vacations as well. I assume by the time we record next week, we'll have a large number of announcements for all of you here at the Cloud Pod. And that is the Week in Cloud. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Foghorn Consulting and Blue Medora. Check out our website, the home of the Cloud Pod, where you can join our newsletter, Slack team, send feedback, or ask questions at thecloudpod.net, or tweet us at #thecloudpod.
Thank you very much, and good night.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to get some sleep.
No, I wasn't recording the whole time.
Oh, no.
No, I'm just kidding.